Bismillah. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi isanin ila yawmiddin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And in this session, we're going to take a different route today, still with Ibn Balbān, of course, the great Imam, Allama, Badruddin, Ibn Balbān al-Dimashqi al-Hanbali. And what we're going to be looking at from some of his works is fasting in preparation for Ramadan. So to kind of introduce the topic here, just to talk a little bit about Ibn Balbān and his, we've been talking about Aqidah, and of course, his work in Aqidah is tremendous. It's foundational, especially for the Muta'akhirin, as you know. His Qala'id al-Qiyan has become the golden standard, if you will, for a teaching manual in Aqidah within the latter generation, along with several other like kind of Aqidah manuals. But he's also known for his work in fiqh. He authored several books on the topic. So, of course, across the spectrum of, the legal code. So right away, he's recognized for one book called Kafi al-Mubtadi. And this is perhaps the bigger of his works, recognized as a foundational work in the madhab for the Muta'akhirin. And it's based upon the madhab. It's not like his own personal conclusions. It is based upon the Hanbali school. And he then authored a Mukhtasar, or a summary of that, which I happen to have a copy of right here. This is called Kitab Akhsar al-Mukhtasarat fi al-Fiqh ala Madhab al-Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And so this is what he calls to be the most summarized summary. Basically, what he notes in his introduction is that there are numerous books that are rather summarized. They're kind of like, I don't want to say primers, but they are entry-level works in the legal code. And basically, he wanted, or his goal was to make the most summarized version of what was available to really cater to his community, I guess, his time, where people were beginning to drift from knowledge and lose interest in the longer, more meaty, beefy works. And so that's what he did here in this book. And the copy that I have actually has some annotations from the great scholar of the madhab as well, Sheikh Abdul Qadir ibn Badran al-Dimashqi. Sheikh Abdul Qadir he's better known as Ibn Badran, also has some very tremendous works and offers, particularly al-Madkhal, which is like an introduction to the madhab. And when I say introduction, I don't mean like as an introductory text. It's quite dense and it's very robust. But it gives you like a gateway into the madhab and talks about a variety of different subjects, including the books that are authored in that. And he mentions this book, Akhsar al-Mukhtasarat, in his work. So this has the annotations from that great Sheikh Ibn Badran. So we know that Ibn Balbān passed away in 1083. Ibn Badran passes away in 1346. So there's definitely some time in between the two. But it does go to show the continuity of the madhab and the respect that the imams had for those that came before them. And then Ibn Balbān authors Mukhtasar al-Ifadat, which I may have referenced in this class before. And if you're following anything that I'm doing on the Hanbali Disciples Telegram channel, then you know we're talking about the margins of this book quite frequently. And also I've been providing translations for various different passages from this book, in particular the last section of the book about general advice. So this book, Mukhtasar al-Ifadat, is also quite beefy. It doesn't cover the entirety of Islamic law in terms of the topics, because this is meant for more of a general audience. and he mentions this in the introduction of the book. It's meant for more of like, you know, like your everyday Muslim that they wanna know and they want to be in the know and know how to worship, and they need some knowledge based on, you know, buying and selling and trading. So it gives a little flavor of that, what's probably most common in those in that realm. Talks about marriage, talks about divorce, talks about manners and etiquette, has some spiritual insights in here. He also has basically qala'id in here as well, although he does expound in different areas and add a few things because that's his own work then at that point and not just a representation of Ibn Hamdan's. So this book, honestly, Mukhtasar al-Ifadat, tremendous. I think it's probably one of the more suitable books for the modern day Muslim that wants to know more than just, you know, their Sunday school, their Islamic Sunday school education. They want to get into like a Talib Ilm program. This book is an amazing book for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use, I'm going to jump between the two just a little bit in the event that I notice something that needs to be added from one or the other to discuss some of the topics on Ramadan. And basically we'll get right into that with Mukhtasar al-Ifadat. Okay, so here in this book, his Kitab al-Siyam, this chapter, he says, يَجِبُ صَوْمُ رَمَضَانَ بِرُؤْيَةِ هِلَالِهِ. So right away, we're into the into the weeds with today's arguments between is it local moon sighting, is it global moon sighting, can we use calculations? So he says يَجِبُ صَوْمُ رَمَضَانَ بِرُؤْيَةِ هِلَالِهِ. So basically, fasting Ramadan is an obligation upon witnessing the crescent moon. The crescent moon of the month of Ramadan. أو إكمال شعبان على جميع الناس. Or the completion of Sha'ban upon all people. So here you can see where he's going, and this is the madhab, and that is a international or a global moon sighting. So if the moon is sighted in one place with a viable witness, then everyone else is obliged to fast. Okay, so that kind of seals the deal for us. And he mentions pretty much the same thing in Akhsar al-Mukhtasarat. Basically, the ru'ya is the legal trigger, not calculations. And also, the Hanabila, they recognize that there's what they call ikhtilaf al-matali', which are like different sighting zones for the moon. As an astronomical reality, the moon can be sighted. It's not like the sun. The moon can be sighted in different places at different times. Meaning here that the birth of the new moon is not sighted at one place every time, but it could be sighted at different locations. And typically the understanding is that wherever it's sighted first, then it should be easier to sight westward. So in the event that it was sighted, for example, in Morocco, it means that the first initial sighting in Morocco, those that were to the east of them, it's likely that they weren't able to see it because of a timing factor, like the timing of the moon and its I should say age, as they consider the birth of the new moon. It's not old enough, if you will, to have been witnessed to the east. But once it's sighted, then everyone to the west of Morocco, so like here in the United States and the Americas, and even in Canada, oddly enough, they can still they should be able to see the moon. Unless, of course, there's an impediment to that witnessing of the moon, and they account for that in the madhab. So the point here, they say that regardless of that ikhtilaf al-matali', once it's sighted, they don't consider that anymore. They're not going to consider the various different matali'. They don't care what you did or didn't do in your location. All they care about is if it was sighted or not as the legal trigger. So wherever it was sighted as a valid witness, that means everybody else has to fast. And this is retrograde, applied in a retrograde fashion. So people to the east, they would be obliged to fast that day. So essentially, they might not find out until very early in their morning, closer to Fajr time, if they're paying attention. Or it could be they find out a little bit later, and that could be like a late report coming to them. And in such a case, based on the principles of the madhab, there would be a qada, a makeup that would have to be done if the requisite intention was not made, which we'll get into shortly. So that gives you basically the very first step, and that is beginning the month of Ramadan with the ru'ya, okay? There is no, and if we were to dive into calculations as an argument, because I know that's something that does come up, and I feel like it's still the minority position, even among the modern day community situation, is that calculations within the madhab are acknowledged, that this is something that is acknowledged in the world. And this is not some new thing that we've come into, but, you know, the Arabs in general have been knowledgeable of astronomy and hisab. They talk about calculations in the classic text. But the jurists of the madhab, and I believe most of the other ones, agree that the calculation is not the legal trigger. It's the ru'ya itself, which means the birth of the new moon's presence is not the trigger. It's the witnessing of it that is. So theoretically, astronomically, the moon could have been born, if you will, but it wasn't witnessed because either it was just too young and invisible to the eye, or even with optic aid, because the Hanabila, they will accept optic aid. Like if you had binoculars or a telescope, they'll accept that. But it was astronomically present. It just wasn't witnessed. We wouldn't take that calculation of astronomic presence. We would take the witnessing of it. And that's based on the hadith and the explicit mention of ru'ya. And that's very different from prayer times. So if you think about, because that's an argument that comes up, is the ru'ya, why don't we take calculations for, why do we use calculations for prayer, but we won't use calculations for Ramadan or the starting of months? And when you look at that issue, you see that the hadith that talk about the issue of starting the month are sumu li ru'yatihi wa aftiru li ru'yatihi. The Prophet ﷺ is explicit in mentioning that the actual ru'ya, which is empirical, it is something that has to be measured by the eye. But when he talks about the prayer times, it's about wujud. It's about the presence, because he defines it by way of shadows, defines it by way of a light, meaning at dawn or at dusk, the colors of the light. It's not about now witnessing the sun. It's about seeing its traces. The traces are evidence of its presence. And that stability in that, or that presence of it without it actually seeing the sun, is something that allows for calculations where we can get those printable prayer charts down to the minute based on location. So that kind of is where we go with that particular argument. And then, of course, they're very clear, not just in the rational argument behind it, but they're explicit. We don't accept hisab. We don't accept it. And there are very few scholars that will. They don't accept hisab they don't take hisab, which is a calculation for accepting, and they don't take it for rejecting. So there are some scholars in different madhabs that will take the hisab, the calculation, to reject a witness. They say, look, it's empirically, or it's by calculations, it's impossible, and so we'll reject your witness. So they don't take that in either regard. They don't take that in either way. He goes on and he says, فَإِنْ حَالَ دُونَ مَطْلَعِهِ لَيْلَةَ الثَّلَاثِينَ مِنْ شَعْبَانَ غَيْمٌ أَوْ قَطَرٌ أَوْ جَبَلٌ. This is where Ibn Balbān, in this particular text, I think adds a layer that many do not. So he says, on the in حَالَ دُونَ مَطْلَعِهِ. So we're talking about the position of it being viewed, right? Where it's the viewing area, if you will, of the moon. So if something were to come between you and the viewing area on the 30th night of Sha'ban, right? So remember, the night comes before the day. So the 30th night of Sha'ban would lead into the 30th day of Sha'ban. So basically, we're just completing the 29th day. We're looking at the 30th night then. So if there was something in the way that impeded your vision, like ghaim, like clouds, or like dust, or like a mountain. So not only atmospheric conditions, but also something that would impede your vision, like structurally. Could be a mountain, it could be trees, it could be tall buildings, something that gets in the way. He says, "Oh, غيرها," anything else, وَجَبَ صِيَامُهُ احتياطًا بنية رمضان. He says it's an obligation to fast as a precautionary measure with the intent that it is Ramadan. That it is Ramadan. وَتَثْبُتُ أَحْكَامُ الصَّوْمِ مِنْ صَلَاةِ التَّرَوِيحِ. And then the rulings will be affirmed in regards to fasting, regarding fasting, such as Salatul Tarawih, ووجوب كفارة بوطء فيه وغير ذلك, as well as intercourse during the daylight hours of Ramadan. You have to pay the kafara, an expiation, and other rulings associated with that. He says, ولا يثبت غير أحكامه كوقوع طلاق وإتق وحلول أجل معلقة عليه. So basically, other rulings they aren't affirmed with this precautionary measure here, like divorce. And that means if someone attached a time to a divorce and said, come Ramadan 1, you're divorced. Or if they attached, for example, emancipation of a slave. They said, come Ramadan 1, you're free to go. Or hulul ajal means like the due date of a debt. They said, Ramadan 1, you owe me the debt. So these rulings will not apply unless the day has been confirmed. Otherwise, we're fasting ihtiyat, as he says, as a precautionary measure. And Aqsar al-Mukhtasarat deals with this a little bit here. Let's see. A little bit here. رؤية نهارا فهو للمقبلة. Okay, رؤية الليلة 30. He mentions the same كغيم وجبل أو غيرها. Says the same thing. And then he mentions here if it's seen during the daytime, it's for للمقبلة. It's for the next night. Right. So he mentions basically the same thing there. So basically, the understanding for this, and this is unique, by the way. فَقْدَرُوا لَهُ is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And basically that term faqdurullah is understood in different ways. So some understand it to mean to calculate, to count, and basically to count 30 days of the month. Within the madhab, though, the understanding is that faqdurullah means to restrict it. And this is based on verses in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in Surah al-Fajr. Let's see here. Surah al-Fajr. Just so I don't strain my brain here. All right. So in Surah al-Fajr, you might recognize this. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَأَمَّا إِذَا مَبَتَلَاهُ فَقَدَرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقَهُ فَيَقُولُ رَبِّي أَهَانًا. So the word here, فَقَدَرَ عَلَيْهِ, in this verse, and this verse is number 16 in Surah al-Fajr. He says, فَقَدَرَ عَلَيْهِ means if the person's been tested by restriction of wealth. The wealth has been restricted, meaning now they're living with a tight budget. That's one verse. There's another verse in Surah Talaq of a similar meaning that uses the same word. And so here, this is based on an understanding of that term. And this is also the practice of a number of companions, including Ibn Umar, if memory serves correct. A number of companions held this particular understanding and practiced it. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma would restrict the month to 29 days. There's another hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said the month is 29 days, meaning as the baseline ruling for the month is 29 days. And then, of course, it could run into 30 days. So that kind of flips the table a little bit to, I believe, what is commonly understood. And for that reason, they say, you're going to restrict the month to 29 days based on that being the kind of the launch point of the month, the touchdown point, if you will. And then you'll fast with the intention of Ramadan. And then if you later find out that it was confirmed that it's Ramadan, then everything counts for you're all good. As opposed to if you found out later that actually that was Ramadan and you didn't fast, then that would be qada. You'd have to make up the day and you would have missed the opportunity. So that touches on a couple of, kind of regular talking points we find circulating in the Muslim sphere out there. After that, he goes on and he says, وَتَثْبُتُ الرُّؤْيَةُ بِخَبَرٍ مُسْلِمٍ. So basically, the ru'ya, or the witnessing of the moon, is established by a news, if you will, of a Muslim, mukallafin adlin, a Muslim who is mukallaf. So mukallaf, we know, means of sound mind and a pubescent. Adlin, who is adl. Adl here doesn't just mean just. Adl is like adala, and we've talked about this previously if memory serves correct. So adala is like man yalzimu at-taqwa wal-istiqama. Okay? The person that adheres to taqwa and they adhere to uprightness in their religion. Walau abdan aw untha, whether they be a servant, a bondservant that is, or a female. ولا يقبل في شوال وبقية الشهور إلا رجلان عدلان. So this is unique for Ramadan because the other months they will not accept the witness of a female. They will accept, or nor will they accept the witness of one in other months. So when Shawwal comes, when it's time to break fast for Eid, there have to be two reliable Muslim male witnesses. All right. After that, he talks about shurut wujub as-sawm. This is about the what are the prerequisites to obligate fasting, and there are four, as he says here. The first is al-Islam wal-bulugh. Okay, so you have to be Muslim. You have to have reached puberty. Wal-aqlu, of sound mind. Wal-qudratu alayhi, and have the physical ability to fast. فَمَنْ عَجَزَ عَنْهُ لِكِبَرٍ أو مرض, he says, whoever is unable to do so based on old age or an illness, لا يرجى زواله. This is a chronic illness here. An illness which you do not expect will be cured or alleviated. He says, أفضر وأطعم عن كل يوم مسكينة. So they're going to break their fast during the day. وأطعم, then they're going to feed for every day one poor person, مد بر أو نصف صاع مما يجزئ في الفطرة. They're going to basically feed every day one poor person. مد بر. A mud is like a double-handed scoop, basically. I mean, give or take. A roundabout measurement there. You can get technical, and there are people that have tried to really fine-tune this to like a liter. This is a measure of volume and not weight. And there are attempts to actually put that into weight so that it becomes easier for people today, right? So one mud is like a quarter of a sa'a, and a sa'a is like 2-point-something liters. If you were to imagine a liter, like a 2-liter bottle, shwaya, a little bit extra to that, and whatever would fit inside of that thing, that would be one sa'a basically. And if you were like in the Muslim world, I remember in Medina, they used to sell those, like it's like a pitcher almost. You could purchase one. And they actually had asanid for some of them. A particular size, there would be a sanid for that measure. Or he says nisfu, so that's one mud, that's a quarter of a sa, or a nisfu sa, that's two of these amounts. Mimma yujzi'u fil fitra, basically what from the foods that would suffice for a fitra, like zakat al-fitr. And that's something that he discusses in detail. So that gives you 4 basic prerequisites for fasting to be obligatory. The next section flows right into it, which is shurut as-sihha, which are the prerequisites of validity. So first we have obligations, and then we have validity. So are you obliged, number 1? If you meet those 4 prerequisites, you're good to go. After that is your fast valid? Number 2. So tier 1, tier 2. Tier 2 is about sihha, that's validity, and there's 6 of them. He mentions al-Islam, again, being Muslim. وَانْقِطَاعُ دَمِ الْحَيْض, which is cessation of menstrual bleeding, nifas, as well as postpartum bleeding. Al-Rabi'u at-Tamyiz. This is number 4, Tamyiz. Tamyiz we know is a mumayyiz, and that's a child that is below puberty, but 7 years of age or above, according to Hijra calendar. وَيَجِبُ عَلَى, this is like a key for parents. يَجِبُ عَلَى وَلِيِّ مُمَيِّزٍ. He says, the guardian of the mumayyiz, it's an obligation, أَمْرُهُ بِهِ, that they command that child to fast. وَضَرْبُهُ عَلَيْهِ إِنْ أَطَاقَهُ, and then to basically spank or punish them if they're capable of fasting. Meaning if they refuse to fast, then there should be some consequences to that. And the reason for this, not mentioned here, but if you look in other works that are a little bit more dense, it's so that they can develop a habit. They can develop a habit. And this is prophetic in nature, right? If we think about the prayer, and when the Prophet ﷺ prescribed prayer for children at 7 years of age, and then they're to be reprimanded by the age of 10. And then when they reach puberty, they're now held, accountable in terms of the sin of not doing it. And so this is a part of the parent's obligation and duty toward their child, is to raise them in a way that establishes good habits in religion, as well as, character and other pursuits that we have in our lives. So you can't be thinking, my poor little miskeen little angel, oh, it's okay. My sweet little, you got to think of it as in I'm raising a God-fearing Muslim, and it would be a beautiful thing if a child was raised to the degree that they got to an age like many of us are today, where we don't remember a time when we didn't fast. I don't remember ever not fasting. I don't remember ever not praying. And for young girls that wear hijab at an early age, right, which is in the madhab is 10, that at some point in their life they might go, yeah, I don't ever remember not wearing hijab. And so the concept of not fasting, the concept of not praying or fulfilling these basic duties is not, it's not personal. It's not a personal concept or a personal reality they live with. It's only one they observe at it from a distance. So this helps kind of really establish within that child good qualities. And so this is an important note that he mentions here. After that, number 5 is al-aqlu. Of course, this is a mental faculty. وَإِن نَوَاهُ لَيْلًا وَجُنَّ أَوْ أُغْمِيَ عَلَيْهِ جَمِيعَ النَّهَارِ إِلَّا لَحْظَةً أَجْزَأَ. He says here, so we're dealing with consciousness, okay, not sleep, but consciousness, where sleep you can come out of, and some types of sleep you're aware of things, so they rule out sleep here. But here is mental faculty or capacity. So they're basically saying, he's saying here that if one person were to make an intention at night, and then Junnah here means they lose that faculty, even if it's momentary. أو أغمي عليه, they lose consciousness all day long. إلا لحظة, except for a moment of the day, then that fast would count for them. But it has to be a moment for the day, as opposed to losing the entire day. And that would be another case altogether. Number 6, as-sadis, he says, an-niyya. This is another hot topic that's floating around out there in the Muslim sphere. An-niyya. Imam Ibn Badran, Ibn Balbān says an-niyya kulla laylatin li kulli sawmin wajib. So you have to have an intention every night for every obligatory fast. فَمَنْ خَطَرَ بِقَلْبِهِ. Then he defines for us what that looks like, the intention. He says, فَمَنْ خَطَرَ بِقَلْبِهِ لَيْلًا إِنَّهُ صَائِمٌ غَدًا. He says, if you have an inclination, a khatira, what happens in the kind of like an inclination or a thought, if you will, in your heart, laylan, at night, that you're going to fast tomorrow. Oh, akala, oh, shariba, biniyati sawmi faqad nawa. He says, or if you eat or you drink with the intention of fasting, then you have made an intention. He says, وَلَا يَضُرُّ الْإِتْيَانُ بَعْدَ النِّيَّةِ بِمُنَافٍ لِلصَّوْمِ. And it will not invalidate that intention if you then do something which would invalidate fasting, which means at night. So like you have, let's say right after Maghrib time, and this is key because the intention has to be made at night. The intention has to be made at night, which occurs from Salat al-Maghrib, or the Waqt al-Maghrib. It begins there and it ends at al-Fajr al-Sadiq, which is the time for Fajr prayer. So you have all of that time to make your intention. So let's say, for example, right after Maghrib adhan starts to be called, so the time is in, now it's night, and you automatically think, yeah, I'm going to fast tomorrow. It's Ramadan 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever. I'll be fasting tomorrow. That was a great fast. Or if you don't really think about that because all you can think about at that moment is iftar and whether or not something was prepared well enough for you or ordered out, so you can't think about the next day's fast. But then as it gets later and you go, you know what, we need sahur because we're going to fast. We need to fuel up a little bit and we need the barakah. The Prophet ﷺ has instructed us to seek out. That is an inclination. I should say that's an intention, the presence of an intention to fast for the day. And that's all that's required within the madhab. You don't have to come up with a structured phrase in order for that to occur. It's something that happens in the heart. And that gives us those 6 prerequisites for validity. And after that, he says, وَفَرْضُهُ إِمْسَاكٌ عَنَ الْمُفَطِّرَاتِ مِنْ طُلُوعِ الْفَجْرِ الثَّانِي إِلَى غُرُوبِ الشَّمْسِ. So here is, it's fard, okay? And in this case, we would say like the pillar of it, if you will, or the obligation of it, if you will. The obligation of fasting is to imsak, that is to refrain, if you will, an al-mufattirat, from the things that invalidate the fast from طلوع الفجر الثاني, from the start of al-fajr al-thani, which is al-fajr al-sadiq. Okay, and that's an important point to note here, that it begins من طلوع الفجر الثاني until غروب الشمس. And the reason that I mention that is because there has been some, I don't want to say confusion, but maybe some confusion around the idea that you can eat and drink during the adhan. I don't know if anyone's ever encountered that before. There's actually a hadith to that degree. The Prophet ﷺ indicated something of that degree. The hadith, the actual wording of the hadith is وَالْآنِيَ عِنْدَ يَدِهِ or فِي يَدِهِ. I can't quite remember the wording at this moment. He says, وَالْآنِيَ فِي يَدِهِ, I think. I can look this up for you here. No, I can't find it really quickly. So, yeah. So anyway, you might have heard that hadith. If anyone has it or can grab it quickly, that would be great. You can shoot it to me in the chat there. So this hadith, by the way, it's not an issue of validity or not, but it is an issue of understanding. And the vast majority of the scholars across the madhab, including the Hanbali Madhab, understand this hadith in a particular way. Not in a way which allows a person to eat or to drink whatever's in their hand while the adhan is being called, if the adhan is called on time. And that's the issue that's at hand here with this particular hadith. So we should understand that within the legal framework, the adhan of Fajr is permissible to be called prior to the actual time. The other adhans for the other prayers are not. They would not be valid to be called early. But the Fajr adhan can be called as early as the middle of the night. And during the Prophet's life, there were 2 mu'adhins. There was Bilal, who would call the early adhan prior to its time. And then there was Adhan ibn Maktoum, who would call the adhan when it was al-Fajr al-Sadiq. And he was blind. And he was alerted to call the adhan when people say asbaht, asbaht, which means the morning, the morning. Basically, al-Fajr al-Sadiq is here. And the Fajr al-Sadiq is determined by not a time on our, of course, today it's calculated, but it's when the thread of light spreads across the entire horizon, right? There's a thread of light that is apparent across the entire horizon, as opposed to a thread which shoots up vertically, as opposed to horizontally. This light that appears vertically, that is kind of restricted to a vertical region and not horizontal across the horizon. This is known as al-Fajr al-Kadhib, which is the deceiving dawn, if you will. And so this precedes al-Fajr al-Sadiq, which is true dawn. And so that's what they were alerting to him. And that's what would lead him to call the adhan. The point being here is this, as is mentioned by Ibn Balbān. It is إمساك عن المفطرات من طلوع الفجر الثاني. So the legal trigger to begin fasting is not the adhan. Somebody just sent it to me here. Jazakallah khair. This hadith, it says, quick moves on the internet. إذا سمع أحدكم من نداء والإناء على يده فلا يضعه حتى يقضي حاجته منه. So here, this is basically تخريج of the hadith. أخرج أحمد والحاكم والبيهقي. So we get some references there. Of course, Imam Ahmad notes this in his Musnad. So whoever of you hears the nida, the call, and the al-aniya, which is like a vessel, is in his hand, فَلَا يَضَعْهُ, do not put it down, حَتَّى يَقْضِيَ, so until they take their need from it. That's what the hadith says. Okay? And the scholars, they understand this to mean this was the Prophet ﷺ addressing an early call, a call prior to al-fajr as-sadiq, as there were earlier calls that were made, no doubt. So there are multiple explanations in order to reconcile here. One of them is that this is talking about the adhan of Bilal, the earlier adhan, because people are knowing, they're learning. Look, once the adhan's called, we have to start fasting. But wait a minute, there's two adhans now. What do we do? Is it this adhan or is that one? So this is the Prophet saying, well, it's actually the first one you can keep eating and drinking. It's the second one, right? Or it was the Prophet ﷺ knew that the adhan was called earlier than it should have been. And so this was a kind of address to that issue. Because in the Quran, it's quite clear, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the white thread from the black thread when he says eat and drink until the white thread becomes distinguished from the black thread of night, basically, or of dawn. So that's a very clear and a very decisive verse in the Quran that defines for us al-fajr al-thani or as-sadiq. And so if a person were, with that understanding in mind, okay, if a person were to hear the adhan and know that the adhan is being called on time, because this Fajr as-Sadiq is also the legal trigger for the adhan to be called on time for Fajr, if they knew that the adhan is being called on time, and they were intentionally eating or drinking during that adhan, their fast is broken. Just as soon as they started, they stopped. And they have to make qada. They have to continue to fast for the rest of the day. It's not like you got an open door now. Oopsies, I can eat for the rest of the day. No, you have to stop. But now you have to make up the day. All right, and so this is where I've actually seen this happen before. That's why I'm kind of elaborating on it. I've seen this practiced in front of my face. And I'm going, whoa, what are you doing? They're like, oh, there's a hadith. And I'm going, oh, wow. Wow. I'm watching you eat and drink, like full on. Woo! Like hold adhan. Like they have the Mashari Rashid adhan, like the long adhan going. So I could eat a whole meal during that time, if I'm being honest with you. Yeah, so they were going in. So it was like I was a little disturbed by that. I've seen it more than one time. And it's not a common, but it is something that is kind of pushed in certain circles, this concept that you can continue. However, across the madhab, to my knowledge, especially in the Hanbali Madhab, no, not at all. And if you had something in your mouth, because this is also a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said you have to spit it out, right? Once you know that the time is in, you're certain that the time is in, right? Because al-asl baqa al-layl, right? We should understand that night is night until proven otherwise. So once certainty is established that the night has ended and the day has begun, if you have something in your mouth, if you were to swallow that intentionally, you've broken your fast. And we remember that the hadith is clear. That's right, Sheikh. The hadith is very clear. So if you have something in your mouth, al-fam min al-kharij, right? The mouth is considered an outward part of the body. So it doesn't mean it's already in, I've committed, it's done. No, it has to be exited. It has to be spat out of the mouth and not ingested intentionally. So that's the basic fard here, the obligation of fasting. He mentions a couple of recommendations. There's a number of these. He mentions 9 of them. He says, وَسُنَّةُ وَسُنَنَهُ تِسْعَةٌ. There's 9 of these. تَعْجِيل الْفِطْر. That means to hasten to make iftar. وَتَأْخِيرُ السُّحُورِ. And that means to delay suhoor. And this is well documented with the Prophet's instructions, to the degree that they counted ayat recited between when they ate and when they prayed. It was reported that there was enough time to recite 50 verses between when they finished suhoor and when they started to pray. Then you have to take into account all of the preparation that goes into prayer. People have to make wudu, they have to come and join the masjid, etc. So, and then we're also thinking 50 verses being recited. It's not mujawwid recitation. We're not doing Abdul Basit mujawwid. 50 verses is like an hour and a half or something like that. Okay? So just a general recitation there is what was documented in hadith literature. Ta'khir suhoor, to delay the suhoor. As he says, وَزِيَادَةُ فِي أَعْمَالِ الْخَيْرِ. This is key, and that is increasing in righteous deeds. وَالْإِكْثَارُ مِنْ قِرَاءَةِ الْقُرْآنِ, to increase in reciting the Quran. وَمِنَ الْأُمْرَةِ, to make abundant or to make multiple umrahs if you can. وَاغْتِسَالُ man ajnama laylan qabla tulu al-fajr. It's recommended to make a ghusl for those that are in a state of sexual impurity at night before the coming of dawn. وَقَوْلُهُ جَهْرًا بِرَمَضَانَ وَسِرًّا بِغَيْرِهِ. This is interesting, by the way. Ibn Balbān's spiritual inclinations here coming out as it is documented in other books. So he says here, وَقَوْلُهُ جَهْرًا بِرَمَضَانَ, that you say out loud in Ramadan. وَسِرًّا, you say quietly in other than Ramadan. إِذَا شُتِمَ, when you're cursed or when you're verbally accosted. إِنِّي صَائِمٌ. So in Ramadan, that's the prescription. When someone begins to verbally abuse or curse at you or something, the response is إِنِّي صَائِمٌ, and that's said aloud in Ramadan. Whereas the other months, if you're fasting, you say that to yourself, Inni sa'imun. And the reason for that is because in Ramadan, everyone's obliged to be fasting. So it's not an issue of piety. But outside of Ramadan, you're trying to keep fasting concealed. You don't want to expose your deed out of fear of riyā, right? Showing off in this case. And so he distinguishes that quality here between the various different months to highlight some spiritual insights and secrets, if you will. After that, he says, يَزْجُرُ نَفْسَهُ بِذَلِكَ. So essentially, saying that to himself at least would be something that would kind of, keep him from responding in a negative way. وَقَوْلُهُ عِنْدَ فِطْرِهِ اللَّهُمَّ لَكَ صُمْتُ وَعَلَى رِزْقِكَ أَفْطَرْتُ سُبْحَانَكَ وَبِحَمْدِكَ اللَّهُمَّ تَقَبَّلْ مِنِّي إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. He mentions a supplication that's recommended to say at the fitrah when you make iftar. وَفِطْرُهُ عَلَى رُطُبٍ فَإِنْ عُدِمَ فَعَلَى تَمْرٍ. He says to break the fast on moist dates, and if unavailable, dry dates. فَإِنْ عُدِمَ فَعَلَى الْمَاءِ. And if you don't have the dry dates, then with water. وَأَنْ يَدْعُوَ عِنْدَ فِطْرِهِ وَأَنْ يُفَطِّرَ الصَّائِمِ. Also to make dua when you make iftar. And then as well to feed those that are fasting. And that's a tremendous reward, feeding those that are fasting. Not even those that are in need, but anyone that's fasting, you can feed and get a tremendous reward. And the reward for feeding a fasting person is the reward of the one that's fasting. So we should take advantage of those opportunities. وَتَتَابُعُ فِي قَضَاءِ رَمَضَانَ. And also to consecutively make up the days of Ramadan if you've missed any. At-tatabu' means one after the other. So that you don't end up in Sha'ban now and you're going, oh man, I've got all these days to make up from Ramadan. Because there is a payment that's due in the event that you don't make them up in time. That gives you an idea of some of the obligations, basically conditions, prerequisites, obligations, and recommendations on what to do. And the next section, of course, makes a lot of sense in the flow, if you will, of things, and that is that we deal with what is impermissible. He says, يَحْرُمُ الْفِطْرُ بِرَمَضَانِ بِلَا عُذْرٍ. It's haram to break the fast in Ramadan without an excuse. That is number one. وَهُوَ مِنْ أَعْظَمِ الْكَبَائِرِ. This is of the gravest sins, that you were to break your fast in Ramadan without an excuse. فَيُعَزَّرُ فَاعِلُهُ تَعْزِيرًا بَلِيغًا. He goes on and he says, this person should be reprimanded, like really severely, for breaking their fast on purpose without excuse. So that guy that was eating in front of me should just pull the belt out. Shaka, you know? فَيُعَزَّرُ فَاعِلُهُ. So the person needs to be reprimanded. Of course, legal recourse is required here in this case. وَيَجِبُ الْفِطْرُ عَلَى الْحَائِضِ وَالنُّفَسَاءِ. And if a woman's entering their menstrual bleeding period or postpartum bleeding, they're obliged now to break their fast. وَعَلَى مَنْ يَحْتَاجُهُ لِإِنْقَاذِ مَعْصُومٍ مِّن مَهْلَكَ, as well as those that need to break their fast in order to save a sacred life. He says, وَيُسَنُّ لِمُسَافِرٍ يَسْتَبِيحُ الْقَصْرَ وَلِمَرِيضٍ يَخَافُ الضَّرَرَ. Here is another very common question or issue, and that is traveling and fasting. And Imam Ibn Balbān says it is a sunnah for the traveler who is permitted to shorten their prayer, and for the ill who fears harm. يَخَافُ الضَّرَرَ. They can break it's recommended to break the fast in these two instances: traveling, which permits shortening, and illness out of fear of harm. And some say, in greater, more beefy works, if you will, what that means is the illness increases, gets worse, causes greater discomfort, or delays recovery. Those are three kind of like standard protocols that you would kind of run through. If any one of these are checked off, then you're in the clear for breaking the fast. If it's like, you have a headache, you have something minor, you're not worried that it's going to cause any harm, you have a little runny nose, those types of things, no, you're not in the right category here in order to break the fast. Okay, the next point is that comes up, that's often asked about travel, and that is وَيُبَاحُ لِمَنْ سَافَرَ فِي أَثْنَاءِ يَوْمٍ. And this is unique here in that it's permissible for someone who travels during the daytime to break their fast, meaning they started the day fasting and then they traveled like at 1 p.m. Dhuhr prayer, they traveled, as long as they breached the limits of their inhabited region and the distance permitted them to shorten prayer, they could break the fast in the daytime and they wouldn't have to complete the day. This is yubah. It's permissible. It's not masnoon, right? It's not masnoon, right? The sunnah is to conclude what we've started here. But yubahu, it's allowable. We don't want to say it's recommended to break the fast in this case. You've already started, and so لا تبطلوا أعمالكم, do not render your deeds invalid or in vain. So ideally, you would continue. However, it is permissible if you decided to take that. And it doesn't matter if the trip is difficult or otherwise. وَلِحَامِلٍ وَمُرْضِئٍ goes on to the pregnant woman, the breastfeeding. خَافَتَا عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمَا أَوْ عَلَى وَلَدَيْهِمَا. So if the pregnant or the breastfeeding woman who fears for either themselves or their child, it says here, so that they're permitted to break their fast. وَيُبَاحُ, right? It's permissible. وَمَنْ أَفْطَرَتْ خَوْفًا عَلَى الْوَلَدِ. Now it's a different case for the woman that's afraid for her child. So the first one includes herself and the child. The second one includes only the child, excludes herself. So her health is not in jeopardy. It's only the child she's worried about. And she breaks her fast for the sake of the child. أطعمت لكل يوم مسكينة. She's to feed for every day a poor person. من مال الولد أو من يمونه. So it's not the lady. She's got to do the deed here. However, it's from the wealth of the child in the event that the child has some inheritance or something. She can take from that in order to provide the food for those that are in need, because it was for that child's sake that the fast has been broken. Or in the event there's nothing like that, men yamuna, who is the one who cares for the child, and that would typically be the wali, the guardian. Most cases, the father would have to come out of pocket for that. All right, and quickly jump to the next section, fil mufattirat. This is always a good one, about the things which break the fast. So here, to run through these rather quickly and to touch on some more modern topics, perhaps, he says there are 13 things. Some of them limit it to 12. ثلاثة عشرة, 13 things. خروج دم الحيض والنفاس. Sometimes those are lumped together. That's the menstrual blood, as well as postpartum bleeding. والموت, that's death. Apostasy, الردة. والعزم على الفطر. That just basically means to have a al-azm al-fitr. You know what that means? That means to be resolved to breaking the fast. You don't have to go through the action. You just have to basically nullify your intention. وَالتَّرَدُّدُ فِيهِ, basically to have doubt about whether you're fasting or not. وَالْقَيْءُ عَمْدًا, that's to voluntarily throw up. وَالْإِحْتِقَانُ فِي الدُّبُرِ, that's like an enema, or injecting something in the anus. They consider that manfadh. It's like an opening to the jawf al-ma'ida, particular the stomach. وَبَلْءُ النَّخَامَةِ بَعْدَ وُصُولِهَا إِلَى الْفَمِ, and this is swallowing mucus after it's reached the mouth. So mucus, whether it's originating from the chest or from the sinuses, if that gets into the mouth, and the mouth begins, he says, وَأَوَّلُهُ, this is unique about Ibn Balbān. He says, وَأَوَّلُهُ مَخْرَجُ الْخَاء. Where does the mouth begin and where does it end? It begins with the kha, that letter where it's produced in the back of the throat. Al-kha, that letter, is where the mouth begins. So if it gets past that point of contact, that articulation point of kha, it's now in the mouth. And because it's in the mouth, وَالْفَمْ مِنَ الْخَارِجِ, we said, the mouth is an external part of the body. You can't now ingest it back in. Phlegm, that is, not saliva. Phlegm. Okay, whether originating from the chest or the sinus. If it doesn't get into the mouth and it just bypasses the mouth altogether, like if it's a sinus drip and it just goes without getting into the mouth, then that's a different story altogether. Okay, that's a different story. All right, so that's that. وَالْحِجَامَ لِلْحَاجِمِ وَالْمَحْجُومِ, of course, that's bloodletting. This is not incisions and it's not blood donation. Al-hijama is a particular act. So hijama is, the fast is broken for the one that does it and for one that has it done to them, and this is ta'abbudi. It's purely devotional in nature, and so it can't be applied by way of qiyas to other means of dripping blood out of the body. He says, وَإِنزَالُ الْمَنِي بِتِكْرَارِ النَّظَرِ, and this is وَلَا بِنَظْرَةٍ وَفِكْرٍ وَاحْتِلَامٍ. So this is orgasmic fluid exiting the body due to looking at something multiple times. Tikrar another means to look at something more than once. And what they're saying is to look at something that's stimulating. And because of that stimulus, it leads to ejaculation of orgasmic fluid. So that would break the fast. La binadratin. But one time, if you were to look at something one time and that would result in ejaculation, that would not break the fast. Also, if it was just based on thinking, someone's thinking about something sensual and stimulating to the degree that they ejaculated, no, it doesn't break the fast. Or if they've had a wet dream, it doesn't break the fast. وَخُرُوجُ مَنِيٍّ أَوْ مَذِيٍّ بِتَقْبِيلٍ. So now we're talking about orgasmic fluid as well as pre-orgasmic fluid, right? And we know what that means. So this is as the result of either kissing, lams, which is touching, أو استمناء, which is self-stimulation, masturbating, أو مباشرة دون الفرج والجماع فيه. So here it is, والمباشرة دون الفرج. That is basically like bodies are touching, we're making contact, we just haven't made penetration, right? So that's what we're referring to there. And then, of course, penetration is going to break the fast. There's no doubt about that. وَالْجِمَاعُ فِي, that may be number 13. وَكُلُّ مَا وَصَلَ إِلَى الْحَلْقِ. This is maybe 13 here. وَكُلُّ مَا وَصَلَ إِلَى الْحَلْقِ أَوْ الْجَوْفِ أَوْ الدِّمَاغِ مِنْ مَاءٍ وَغَيْرِهِ فَيُفْطِرُ إِنْ قَطَرَ. So here he says anything that reaches the throat or the jawf, which is a cavity, أو الدماغ, which is it's typically like the brain, but it's more like the cavity, the head cavity, if you will. be it liquid or otherwise. فَيُفْطِرُ إِنْ قَطَّرَ فِي أُذُنِهِ. Now he describes some cases. These are like maybe not normal. There may be some abnormal cases. فَيُفْطِرُ إِنْ قَطَّرَ فِي أُذُنِهِ. So if they put a drop in the ear, مَا وَصَلَ إِلَى دِمَاغِهِ, and that reaches that cavity, the head cavity or the brain area, if that drop in the ear reaches into the cavity there of the head, then it breaks the fast. And that can happen medically. It can make its way through the membrane there, just as it can through the nose, reach into that cavity. He says, "O dawa al-ja'ifa fawasala ila jawfihi." So al-ja'ifa, he says, if you're treating a wound, al-ja'ifa is a wound which has now opened a passageway into the jawf, the cavity. The cavity is considered like the hollow part. Normally, it's referred to as the stomach, the open cavity of the body. So here, if you're treating a wound that is open to that cavity, and the medicine you're treating the wound with reaches inside, then you break the fast for doing that as well. After that, he goes on and he says, فَوَصَلَ إِلَى جَوْفِهِ أَوْ اكْتَحَلَ. If you put on eyeliner, كُحُل بِمَا عَلِمَ وُصُولَهُ إِلَى حَلْقِهِ, and you know that reaches the throat, and you know that if you taste it. And that's also a menfed. This is menfed غير عادي. It's not the typical access point, but it is considered an access point, that it drains the tear duct. And we know that from a tear duct being blocked, the tears will drain into the sinus, and you'll taste it in your mouth. Sometimes eye drops they give you can end up tasting it in your mouth, or if they're colored, you'll see the color in your mouth. And so that's definitely a menfed there. So if drops get into the throat from the eye, you break the fast. After that, he says, أو مضغ علكا أو ذاق طعاما فوجد طعمه في حلقه. If you were to chew gum, this is like a traditional mastic gum, by the way, we're referring to here. It's not one that dissolves like today's gums. If you were to chew that or taste food, and then you were to taste it in your throat, then you would break your fast. أو بلع ريقه بعد أن وصل إلى ما بين شفتيه. Now he gets to the saliva. If you swallow saliva after it had reached ma bayna shafatay, between your two lips. All right, so the moment that the saliva comes out of the mouth and is now on the lips, and this happens sometimes, like some people when they talk a lot, you might start to see saliva form in the corners of their mouth. Right, it's like starts to come out a little bit. So that type of exit of the saliva at this point, if they were to swallow that, then they would have broken their fast. All right, because at this point now, it's possible to remove that, as opposed to the saliva that's constantly generating in the mouth. They excuse that because it's just too difficult to manage throughout the day, unlike phlegm. ما بين شفتيه وإن فعل شيء من ذلك ناسيا. And we conclude here with this. If it did any of that forgetfully or by coercion, لم يفطر إلا بالجماعة, then those things wouldn't break the fast out of forgetfulness or coercion. What would, however, is بالجماعة, which is intercourse. So there's a couple of things here that we could understand from this passage, like modern day applications, like inhalers that they will introduce a medicine into al-jawf. It will go into the throat. There will be medicine even if it's not detected by taste. We know that there's jirm, there's a substance, there's material that's introduced. It's not just oxygen. So those types of things have to be avoided during the daylight of Ramadan. Toothpaste is another thing. This is al-ilk الذي يتحلل أجزاؤه في الفم. It's like a type of gum in which pieces of it dissolve in the mouth. So this is haram, by the way, to chew gum that we know of today, like that has sugars or flavor agents that dissolve in the mouth, and typically you swallow them. Even if you didn't swallow them, it would be considered haram in the madhab. And the reason for that is they have a principle, yuqimu al-madhinna maqam al-ma'inna, which is basically they establish that what is highly likely to be certain. What's highly likely, they treat it as that which is sure. And those types of gums which dissolve in the mouth, parts of it dissolve, it's almost a surety that you're going to swallow that as you're swallowing the saliva, because when you chew gum, it generates more saliva than normal. And that's only managed by constantly swallowing that. So this is very much like toothpaste in that the paste itself, when it's put in the mouth, parts of it, all of it really dissolves as it comes in the form of a paste. Now it dissolves in the mouth. The flavor agents, the oils, they stick to the mouth, in the teeth, around the gums, on the tongue, up, down, all over the place. And it's kept in the mouth for a duration as opposed to like tasting food, which is disliked without purpose or without reason. And so the toothpaste should be avoided. And if you did taste it in the back of your throat, then it would break your fast. Definitely stay away from that during the daylight hours of Ramadan. Much more to be talked about. This is just a recap of some of the concepts. We didn't touch on intercourse during the daylight of Ramadan. I think that's quite obviously for most people. And that's what we're going to cover for this evening. Jazakallah khair.